Hello, everybody. Great to be learning with you at a special time this Thursday. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. And Chodesh Tov. It's the second day of Rosh Chodesh as we welcome the new Hebrew month of Iyar. Bill in the house, Paul in the great Northwest, Belle in Texas, Sharon in New Jersey, hoping I can do two things at once. We all do. Guy in Ohio, Elan in Silver Spring. Welcome, everybody. Let's be efficient. Our daf today is page Samech Zayin, page 67 here in Tractate Bava Metzia, the 22nd volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5 or 4. Of Mishna number 4 here in Tractate Bava Metzia in chapter 5. Yeah, exactly. Mishna number 4 in chapter 5. Okay, we got a little bit of a head start on our daf yesterday, so a few paragraphs from the top. The Gemara relates, there was a certain woman who said to a certain man, "Go purchase land for me from my relatives." So he went and purchased land on her behalf. So he's acting as her agent. And the relative who sold her the property said to the man acting as her agent, "If I will have money in the future, will you give the field back to me?" And the agent said to him, "Well, you and she," right, my principal, the woman on whose behalf I'm buying, "you and she are relatives. And I assume that you will be able to come to an arrangement between the two of you." So the Gemara discusses the legal significance of that response by the agent. Rabba bar Rav Huna said, in the case of any expression such as "you and she are relatives" that the agent says, the seller relies on the assumption that he will be able to come to an agreement with his relative, and therefore he does not conclusively resolve to enable the other to acquire the field. Because he said to the agent, "Okay, so if I have money, in the future when I'm not so hard up, can I buy this field back?" And the agent says, "Well, you and she are relatives, I'm sure you will." Now, you might have thought that what we're talking about is whether the agent's words create an obligation for the woman, his principal, to sell back the field in case this relative, the current seller, has the money in the future and can buy it back. We might have thought that what we're discussing here is whether that woman would be obligated to sell the field back. But that's not the issue at hand. In fact, the issue is that because the relative says, "Will I be able to buy the field back later?" what he has demonstrated is that he's not really happy about selling the field now. And he's hoping that he has some kind of a built-in ability to, regain the field later. And that is evidence that he is not all in, his heart is not all in, selling it now. And so what the Gemara is asking is, since he has given evidence that he's not really happy about selling the field, has he actually sold the field? And the answer is no. He has not sold the field. There was no deal because of this evidence of reluctance. The Gemara comments, in that case, the land itself must be returned to its owner, the one who didn't want to sell to his female relative. It's irrelevant that she was female. It's just to identify the difference between the seller and the buyer here. But what is the law with regard to the produce consumed by the buyer, right? The principal of the agent who was sent to buy. What is the law with regard to the produce consumed by the buyer in the interim? Is it deemed fixed interest, prohibited by Torah law? And can it be removed from the buyer by means of legal proceedings adjudicated by judges? Or perhaps it is considered like a hint of interest, prohibited by rabbinic law, and therefore it cannot be removed from the buyer by means of legal proceedings adjudicated by judges. So it's very interesting that, like, what's happening here? Is it that it's an enforceable promise that this guy can buy back the field whenever he wants? Or is it that there was no deal at all? Right? And it seems that there's no deal at all. Now, when would this be enforced? I mean, presumably it would only be judged to be no deal because the seller regrets and wants to get it back. The woman is refusing and he's going to court. And that's when the judges say there was no deal to begin with. Now, not that the agent created a right for you to buy it back, but rather that your heart was not sincere at the sale in the first place, and therefore there was no deal. But money did change hands. So if there was no deal and money changed hands, then what we have is a loan. And that money is going to be returned to the woman. It wasn't intended to be a loan, but money changed hands, and then money was returned. So it's acting as a loan. Now, if he continued, or rather that she was consuming the produce of the field while the money was in the hands of the seller, who's now being deemed a borrower, if she is consuming the produce of the field during that period, then that's interest, or at least the appearance of interest or the hint of interest. So what they're asking is, okay, so that would be prohibited interest. But it wasn't like they made a deal and that she could consume the produce while the loan was outstanding. It was recharacterized as a loan from a deal that seemed to be a purchase. So since it was never set up as a prohibited interest-bearing loan where the interest took the form of her consuming the produce while she held the field, the question is now that we're unwinding the deal and saying that the seller gets his field back because it never was a purchase and sale, his heart really wasn't in it, and it was recharacterized as a loan, does the court also step in and say that any produce from the field that she consumed while she held it also has to be returned to the buyer? Or do we say that it was, since it was not set up as some kind of fixed interest, it wasn't intended to be interest on a loan, it's just that's the way things worked out, that while the court will restore the field to its prior owner, the court will not remove the produce or charge the woman for the produce that she consumed while it was in her possession. All right, that's the question being asked. Is it deemed fixed interest prohibited by Torah law, and therefore that produce can be removed from the buyer by means of legal proceedings? Or perhaps it is considered just a hint of interest, which is prohibited only by rabbinic law, not Torah law, and therefore we don't remove it once it has changed hands in a legal proceeding. So Rabba bar Rav Huna said it stands to reason that it is like a hint of interest, and it cannot be removed from the buyer by means of legal proceedings in a rabbinic court. And Rava similarly said it is like a hint of interest, and it cannot be removed from the buyer by means of legal proceedings before the judges. Abaye said to Rava, with regard to a mortgage, right now is set up as a mortgage, right? Remember that the previous incident, they weren't trying to create a loan, they thought it was a purchase. Now we're talking about a mortgage. So Abaye says to Rava, with regard to a mortgage, if the borrower pledged a field to the lender, and the lender worked the field and consumed its produce during the term of the loan without any agreement allowing him to do so, what is the law? Right? So the field was pledged as collateral for a loan. If they had said that the lender can consume the produce of the field while the loan is outstanding, prohibited. That's clearly charging interest on a loan. But rather, it was the borrower borrowed the money. let's say, and he used the money to go on a trip. The field was just sitting there doing nothing. The lender says, well, I have the rights to this field as collateral for the loan. I might as well make it productive. I'll farm it and take produce from it. Is that going to be considered prohibited interest that needs to be actually transferred to the borrower? Or is it not? Is it just hint of interest, and what the lender took, he took, and the court doesn't step in and remove it from him? Well, there, in the previous case, what is the reason that it was merely a hint of interest? Is it because the seller did not fix a particular sum for the buyer's interest? Well, here too, the lender did not fix a particular sum for the borrower, and accordingly, it should just be considered a hint of interest. And now that the lender has already taken it, the court doesn't step in and remove it from him. Or perhaps the key issue is that in that case that we just did a moment ago, there was a sale that got recharacterized as a loan, but it was intended to be a sale. But here, where it was from the outset, it was characterized as a loan. They understood lender lending money to a borrower. And even though they didn't talk about him consuming the produce of the field pledged as collateral, it would bear too strongly a resemblance to prohibited interest. So Rava said to him, what is the reason that it was merely a hint of interest? It was considered a hint of interest because the seller did not fix a particular sum for the buyer's interest. Well, here too, the lender did not fix a particular sum for the borrower. Therefore, it is not fixed interest. Is a hint of interest. We were prohibited at the outset, but now that it has happened, the court doesn't step in and remove the produce from the lender. Rav Papi said Ravina performed an action with regard to a case like this, and he calculated and he removed from the lender the value of the produce that he had consumed in the interim. And this decision was not in accordance with the opinion of Rabba bar Rav Huna, right? So presumably, Ravina thought this was too similar to prohibited interest, and just to, protect people from committing the appearance of prohibited interest, he went and took the produce and deducted it from the amount of the outstanding loan so that the lender did not benefit from it at all. In fact, it was almost like the opposite, because he had to work to produce that produce, and then the produce got charged against the loan that he had outstanding with the borrower. And so that's why perhaps this decision was not in accordance with the opinion of Rabba bar Rav Huna. Mar, the son of Rav Yosef, said in the name of Rava, with regard to this following type of mortgage, in which the lender holds part of the borrower's land, and he may consume its produce, well, then the law depends on the local custom. Okay, so now we're about to examine a situation where the lender lends money, there is a field pledged as collateral, and the lender is indeed permitted to consume produce from that field pledged as collateral while the loan is outstanding. Now, why would that be permitted? A moment ago, we said it's not going to be permitted because they didn't agree to do that. It would be permitted because they didn't agree to it in advance. But now we're talking about a situation where they do agree to it in advance. Well, that sounds like it's going to be prohibited interest. So why would they permit it? Well, there's going to be a couple different situations or explanations or justifications for why they might permit it. One of them is you charge it against the loan. Okay, this is how the borrower is going to pay off the loan, that the lender can consume the produce while the loan is outstanding, and it's actually drawing down the principal of the loan, right? So that makes sense. That's not interest. That's actually payment of the loan. So that's one of the ways. Let's see what are the others. So in a place where the custom is that the borrower can repay the loan at any time, right, so this is a different idea. The borrower can repay the loan at any time. So the seller is going to have use of the field, and the borrower at any time can get his field back by paying off the loan. So in a place where the custom is that the borrower can repay the loan at any time, and when he does, the court removes the lender from the land as soon as the loan is repaid. Then, once the lender has consumed a measure of produce equivalent to the amount of money that he lent, we remove him from the land at that point, as the produce consumed is considered repayment of the loan. So it's what I'm saying. The lender can consume produce, and once the amount of produce he has consumed matches the money that he lent out, he's removed from that land. He used the land in order to pay off the loan that he extended to the borrower, and once it's repaid via produce, the land reverts to the borrower's possession. Makes perfect sense. If the lender consumed a measure of produce worth more than the value of the loan, that sounds like more than the value of the loan. Wouldn't that now constitute interest? But says the Gemara, if he consumed a measure of produce worth more than the value of the loan, we do not remove the value of the excess produce from him, as that which he consumed is already gone. And similarly, we do not calculate any extra produce as payment from one document to another, meaning if the same borrower owed the lender an additional sum from a different debt recorded in a different document, we do not consider the additional produce that the lender consumed as part of the payment from that second document. Rather, each loan is treated on its own terms. And if the field belonged to orphans, once the lender consumed the measure of produce equivalent to the amount of money he was owed, we remove him from the field. And if he consumed a measure of produce worth more than the value of the loan, we take that additional amount from him. And we do calculate extra produce as payment from one document to another. And the reason is that the owner of the field generally forgives payment for the extra produce that the lender consumed. But minor orphans are too young to forgive a debt, and the case is therefore judged according to the letter of the law. Rav Ashi said, now that you have said that if he consumed more than the value of the loan, we do not take it from him, as it is considered merely a hint of interest. It wasn't something they agreed to, it's just something that happened. And what he consumed, so we just leave it. We don't step in and remove that from him, this produce that he consumed beyond the value of the loan that he extended. But now that we have said this, it follows that if the lender consumed a measure of produce equivalent to the amount of money owed to him, we also do not remove him from the land without the borrowers paying him money. And what is the reason for this? To remove him from the land without the borrowers paying him money is like taking money from him. And this consumption of the produce is only a hint of interest, and the law is that a hint of interest cannot be removed by legal proceedings adjudicated by the judges. Now, this is a little confusing because what money is the borrower paying if the lender has already consumed produce equivalent to the value of the loan? And that's why we're removing him from the land. So the note here says, wherever a mortgage involves a hint of interest, if the borrower seeks to deduct from the debt the value of the produce that the lender consumed, he is not allowed to do so. If the borrower retracted permission and said he no longer wishes the lender to consume the produce as interest, he may subtract the value of anything the lender consumes at a later stage. Now the Gemara relates, Rav Ashi performed an action in the case of this kind, which involved minors, and he performed it as though they were adults. So even if the lender consumed produce equivalent to the amount of the debt, Rav Ashi would not collect the value of the produce from him, as this is merely a hint of interest, and therefore it cannot be claimed in court, even from minors. Now we're on page 67b. Rava, the son of Rav Yosef, says in the name of Rava, with regard to this following type of mortgage in which the lender holds part of the borrower's land and may consume its produce, so the law depends on the local custom. In a place where the custom is that the borrower can repay the loan at any time and the court removes the lender from the land, the lender may consume the produce of the land only with a deduction in the amount of the loan granted to the borrower, equivalent in value to that of the produce consumed by the lender. He's paying down the loan by allowing the lender to consume the produce from the land. And a Torah scholar, who must be especially careful with regard to his conduct, may not consume the produce, even with a deduction in the amount of the loan, because it's too similar to prohibited interest, even though it's not. And the Gemara poses a question, but if so, in what manner may he consume the produce? And the Gemara answers, by a fixed payment, the details of which the Gemara will soon explain. And the Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that a fixed payment is permitted. But according to the one who says that a fixed payment is forbidden, then what is there to say? As it was stated, with regard to a fixed payment, Rav Acha said and Ravina disagreed. One said that a fixed payment is permitted, and the other said that a fixed payment is forbidden. And the Gemara clarifies, what are the circumstances of this fixed payment? What do you mean by a fixed payment? And the Gemara explains, one case of a fixed payment is where the lender says to the borrower, for a period of up to 5 years, I will consume the produce of the field without a deduction in the amount of the loan, and from that point forward, I will appraise for you the value of all the produce I consume and subtract this sum from the debt. And there are those who say a different version of this discussion. Any consumption of produce by lender without a deduction in the amount of the loan is prohibited as interest. That makes sense. If he's consuming any produce and it's not being deducted from the amount of the loan, then how is that not prohibited interest? So here it says, if any produce that the lender consumes from a field owned by the borrower that's being held as collateral, it has to reduce the amount of the loan so that it's not prohibited interest. And what are the circumstances of a permitted fixed payment? When the lender says to the borrower, for a period of up to 5 years, I will consume the produce with a fixed deduction in the amount from the loan. And from this point forward, I will appraise for you the value of all the produce I consume and deduct the sum from the loan. Now, this is very interesting. So for the first 5 years, he doesn't appraise. So here what they're saying is, we don't exactly know how much produce this field is going to create. Could be less than the amount of the loan, could be more. But for 5 years, we're going to reduce your loan by, let's say you have a loan of 10,000 dinars. And for 5 years, we're going to reduce the amount of the loan, 1,000 dinars per year, in return for the lender consuming all the produce of the field. Whatever the field generates goes to the lender and reduces the amount of the loan by 1,000 dinars a year. That's a fixed payment. It might result in more money being paid, that in the borrower sort of giving more than the loan is worth, in the sense that the field might generate more produce than 1,000 dinars worth of produce per year. But it also might generate less. And so that's why I think they would permit that. Now, after the 5 years, they say, okay, the lender will keep consuming the produce in return for reducing the amount of the loan, but they'll appraise it each year and only reduce the amount of the loan by exactly the value of the produce that's being consumed that year. And this would seem to be permitted. Now the Gemara comments, the one who prohibits the practice according to the first version permits the practice described in the second. That one makes sense to me. The Gemara asks, but according to the one who also prohibits the practice described in the second version, how is it permitted to consume the produce of a mortgaged field? And the Gemara replies, it is permitted in a case like that of a mortgage according to the custom of Surah, a city in Bava, in Babylonia, in which they write the following formula in the loan document. Upon the completion of these years during which the lender may consume the produce of the field, this land shall leave his possession without money and return to the owner, as the entire amount of the loan will have been repaid by means of the consumption of the produce. Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, both say, with regard to this type of mortgage, the law depends on the local custom. In a place where the custom is that the borrower can repay the loan at any time, and the court removes the lender from the land is not considered his property at all. And therefore, another creditor of the lender cannot collect a debt owed to him by the lender by repossessing it. And if the lender dies, his firstborn son does not receive a double portion of that field because it's not his field. He just has a right to produce that's paying off his loan. And the sabbatical year cancels a debt of this kind because it is not viewed as already having been collected. It is a debt that's being paid over time, and if the sabbatical year arrives while it's still outstanding, the debt is canceled. But in a place where they do not remove the lender from the land before the appointed time, even if the debt is paid, then the land has been temporarily transferred to him, like a sale. And then the land, and therefore a creditor, so it's his land during this period, and a creditor of the lender can collect a debt owed by the lender by repossessing that field, and his firstborn receives a double portion of it, and the sabbatical year does not cancel the debt because he has a right to that land for a certain number of years. At the end of those years, it returns to the borrower, and this was sort of a little bit more like a rental than a loan, and that is why the sabbatical year wouldn't cancel it. Now, Mar Zutra said in the name of Rav Papa, with regard to this type of mortgage, the law depends on the local custom. In a place where the custom is that the borrower can repay the loan at any time and the court removes the lender from the land, they remove him even from dates he has already harvested and spread out on the mats. But if he has lifted them and placed them in the baskets, he has thereby acquired them, and they are his. And according to the one who says that when an active acquisition is performed by means of placing items in the buyer's vessels that are located in the seller's domain, the buyer has acquired the items even if he did not lift them while they were in the baskets. He acquired them when they were placed on the mats. The Gemara discusses other laws of mortgages. It is obvious that if the loan was given in a place where they generally remove the lender from the field upon the repayment of the debt, but upon lending the money, okay, so remember this idea that if you lend money and because you lent the money, you have a right to the produce of that field for a certain number of years, right? And so in some places, if the borrower gets money together and just pays off the loan, then he gets his field back immediately. But in other places, the custom is, well, he could repay the loan early, but the the lender, still has a right to keep that land for the period of time that they agreed upon. Now, maybe he can't consume more produce than the loan is worth, and so he's now going to have to pay for the produce that he removes from the field. I'm not sure how that works. But we see that in some places, he had a right to that field for a certain number of years, even if the loan is paid early. And in other places, if the loan is paid early, they take the field away from the lender. Okay, so let's continue. So it is obvious that if the loan was given in a place where they generally remove the lender from the field upon the repayment of the debt, but upon lending the money, the lender said, I will not be removed, then his stipulation is respected. As he said, he will not be removed, and he gave the money only subject to this condition, and the borrower agreed. But if the loan was made in a place where they generally do not remove him, and he said, I will be removed when the money is returned, then what is the law? Is it necessary to perform a formal act of acquisition with him to formalize this commitment? Or is it not necessary as his statement alone is binding? And Rav Papa said it is necessary to perform an act of acquisition with him. Rav Sheshis, the son of Rav Yidi, said it is necessary to perform an act of acquisition with him. And the Gemara concludes, and the law is that it is necessary to perform an act of acquisition with him. So remember, what do you mean active acquisition? Means that a loan gets characterized as a sale that's temporary, and that's why he needs to make an active acquisition. The Gemara addresses a different kind of case. If the borrower said to the lender, I will go to get the money to repay you, so the lender may not consume any more of the produce, as this statement is sufficient to remove him from the property. But if the borrower said, I am going to make an effort to get the money, then the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, engaged in a dispute concerning the law. Ravina said the lender may continue to consume the produce until the borrower actually brings the payment, and he cannot be certain the borrower will manage to get the money until then. And Mar Zutra, the son of Rab Mari, said he may not consume the produce anymore. And the Gemara concludes, and the law is that he may not consume the produce anymore. The Gemara relates Rav Kahana and Rav Papa and Rav Ashi would not consume the produce of mortgaged fields, even with a deduction in the amount of the loan, as they were concerned about the possible violation of the prohibition on interest, right? We said that if you're reducing the amount of the loan every time the lender consumes produce from the mortgaged field, well, then the loan is being repaid. There's no interest. However, if you're consuming produce from a mortgaged field, even though you're drawing down the value of the principal, you might miscalculate. You might take more than you thought you did. That would slip you into the realm of prohibited interest. And even though it's hint of interest, and a court wouldn't step in and remove it from the lender after he already consumed that produce, nonetheless, the pious ones would not engage in the practice for fear of inadvertently coming to take prohibited interest. And at this point, I will mention, for those who play Wordle, I didn't say yesterday, because then it would be a spoiler, but yesterday, I guessed the Wordle word on the first try. And the word was pious. And I've been guessing that as my first word for about a year, hoping that, someday it would come in. The odds were against it ever happening. There's apparently 2,309 words that can be Wordle words and 12,000 words that are permitted as a guess in Wordle. So to actually get it on the first try is obviously pure luck. And I really thought the odds were against me, if you know what I mean, because pious is not a word I would generally associate with the New York Times. But it came in. It was a lot of fun to see my first guess be the Wordle word, and all the more so that the word was pious. Okay, let's keep going. Where am I? Yes, Mar Zutra said the explanation for the practice of the one who does consume the produce with a deduction in the amount of the loan is just as in the case of an ancestral field, i.e. a field that one inherits from his ancestors within his family holdings in the land of Israel. So the Torah states that one who consecrates his ancestral field, right, he gives its value to the temple, he consecrates that field to the temple treasury, so he can redeem it from the temple treasury in return for 1 selah, which is 4 dinars, for each year remaining until the Jubilee, until the Yovel. So the comparison is as follows. With regard to an ancestral field, is it not the case that even though he consumes abundant produce over the course of the years, nevertheless the merciful one states in the Torah that he redeems it at 4 dinars a year, despite the fact that the produce is worth more, perhaps much more. Well, here too, it is no different. Since he established the deduction of a fixed sum, he cannot be sure that he will ever receive. The practice is permitted, even if he in fact profits from the arrangement. And the one who prohibits this arrangement would have said to you that the law with regard to an ancestral field is discussing consecrated property, and the merciful one established redemption for it, on the basis of which the sages determined the full redemption. But here, by contrast, we're not talking about consecration and redemption, we're talking about a loan. And therefore, this practice has the appearance of interest, and they prohibit it. We are on page 68a now, just getting a little bit of a head start. We'll finish this discussion on Mishna number 4. Rav Ashi said, the elders of the town of Mata Metzia told me an unspecified mortgage known as a mashkanta. This is for 1 year. And the Gemara poses a question. What is the practical difference resulting from this ruling? And the Gemara explains it means that if the lender consumed its produce for a year, the borrower can then remove him. But if not, the borrower cannot yet remove him, as an unspecified mortgage does not last less than this period of time. He didn't say how long he has at least a year. And Rav Ashi said, the elders of Mata Metzia told me, what is the meaning of the word mashkanta? It is referring to the fact that it resides, shechuna, with him. And the Gemara again asks, what is the practical difference resulting from this statement? And the Gemara answers, it is relevant for the law of one whose field borders the field of his neighbor. Since the mortgaged field resides with him, it is considered his property to a certain extent, and therefore he is granted the right to purchase a neighboring field before an outside party does so. Rava said, right, so it's a nice law. It's a very sweet law. I find that there's a kind of a friendliness and a kindness to it that's beautiful. That if you're selling a field, before you sell it to a third party, you give the neighbor of that field, who would certainly benefit by having two fields adjacent to each other that he could then farm more easily, you have to give him the right of first refusal. He has to match the market price, whatever you could get from a third party, but you have to give him that chance. Even if you don't like your neighbor, you have to give your neighbor a chance to buy that field because it's such a convenience to him. It doesn't really hurt you as you're leaving anyway. Now, Rava said that the law is not in accordance with those who approve of the tacit interest agreement of Rav Papa that we discussed a few days ago, nor in accordance with those who approve the documents of Mechoza, nor in accordance with those who approve the tenancies of Naresh. And the Gemara explains, the law is not in accordance with those who approve the tacit interest of Rav Papa. This was referring to the tacit interest agreement we saw on page 65, that Rav Papa would sell liquor and accept delayed payment at a higher price and believe this to be permitted since he did not gain anything from the arrangement, but it was prohibited because his customers did gain something by that arrangement. What are the documents of Mechoza? In Mechoza, they would lend money to someone for him to use in a joint business venture and add the profits to the principal as though the transaction were already completed. And they would write the full sum owed, including the lender's share of the profits, in the document. And the reason it is prohibited to do this is that who says there will be any profit? It is possible that the borrower will suffer a loss or earn less than expected, and he will eventually be paying interest if he pays the full amount recorded in the document. Mar, the son of Amemar, said to Rav Ashi, father would do so, i.e. he would add the profits to the sum of the loan contract, and when they came before him and told him that they had not earned enough profit, he would believe them and reduce the debt to the amount that they had actually earned. And Rav Ashi said to him, this works out well while the lender is still here. But if he dies and the document comes before the orphans, then what would happen? Unaware that profits had been added to the document, the orphans would demand the entire sum, which would constitute interest. And the Gemara comments, this innocent observation of Rav Ashi's was like an error that proceeds from a ruler, Ecclesiastes 10:5, and the Maimar died shortly afterward. He didn't mean to issue a curse, but when he said, well, what if you die, and then what's going to happen with the orphans? And it happened. Right? People who are living at that level, real tzaddikim, all the more so they have to watch every word that comes out of their mouth because their words have so much power. The Gemara addresses the final ruling. What are the tenancies of Naresh? In the town of Naresh, they would write a document in this manner. So-and-so has mortgaged his land to so-and-so, and the borrower then went and leased it back from him for a fee that was added to the payment of the loan. This transaction is problematic. When did the lender acquire it such that he can subsequently transfer it back to the borrower? As he is not the actual owner of the field, the money for the lease is actually payment for the delay in repaying the loan. That would be interest. And the Gemara comments, and nowadays, when we write a document in this manner, we acquired the property from him, and we waited a while, and then the borrower went and leased it back for such and such a price, a formula that states that the lender has acquired the field and may now lease it to others, which is utilized so as not to lock the door in the face of potential borrowers. Now it is permitted, as it does not have the appearance of a loan with interest. And the Gemara concludes, but this is not correct, as even if the field is in his possession, since he has not acquired it properly, it is considered interest. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 5. We'll pick it up tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, with Mishnah number 5. Got time for just a few questions, if there are any. Dum bum bum bum. Google Doc. Load. Load. What's going on? Why would it not load? To avoid having problems like this, we invest in blazing fast internet, and nonetheless there's often delays. Okay, Sharon, can timed payment installations be written into the loan repayment methods? Yes. Yes. Right? We just have to make sure, in other words, can you pay off the loan over time? Absolutely. We just have to make sure that there's not some kind of additional payment being added which compensates the lender for the time value of his money. Bill, thinking out loud, we've established in a glancing sort of way that loans by legal entities aren't subject to the same rules as person-to-person loans, so I recognize that the question is largely moot, but I'm wondering aloud if there's a difference between a loan from a commercial enterprise, a loan from a banker, as it were, and a loan from a mutual association like a credit union. In the latter, the borrower is also a partner in the enterprise, and so the interest paid is paid in part from himself. And it seems to me that the latter is a different animal than a loan at interest per se. I mean, I think that's really interesting. I just I'm not competent to answer. I'm not sure. I know that there's a difference between partnerships, doing a business, or a legal entity doing a business, even though it's owned by Jews, so that, for example, they have a business, it needs money, and one of them lends money to the business. That is a situation where they can, charge an interest rate. And it's considered an arm's length negotiation, and it's done. I mean, it has to be done in that way and very overtly, just to avoid any hint of self-dealing that harms the partnership, the interest of the partnership. But it doesn't create an interest problem, prohibited interest problem. Now, so I think all the more so, perhaps, when you're talking about a credit union or a nonprofit. Well, interesting. I mean, if it's a nonprofit, then you run into other kinds of problems. But yeah, you're definitely getting into really important and interesting nuances that I'm just not competent to answer. It's a good question. And Bill also says it's also a good strategic word to start with. 3 vowels. Oh, pious, exactly. And P and S are both very common letters. I usually start with a do, and I got pious within 3. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, what's good, it was so thrilling. It came up as a word 1. Now that it's done, I don't know. There's a list of all the words that's ever been used, so you can come up with a word that has a bunch of vowels in it that hasn't been a first one, and maybe run with that. But a do is a great one to just get your vowels all in line right away. Awesome, my friends. Great to be learning with you. Look forward to learning with you tomorrow at the same time, noon Pacific on Friday. Have a good day.